Hey everybody, welcome. I'm sorry to those of you that were waiting in the other stream. We had to restart it, but today we're going to be talking about the horrors of socialism resolution that I'm sure you have all heard about at this point, or most of you. Then we'll react to a Bill Maher video on spewing some anti-communist propaganda. Then we're going to, right?
So that's always fun, right?
That's always fun, right? I think it'll be the first time we react to Bill Maher. It's usually these far right hacks that are making anti-communist videos that we react to, but that should be fun. I haven't seen it yet, so then we'll talk about the Foreign Affairs Committee, specifically the kicking out of Ilhan Omar, and more specifically, really AOC's reaction to that. I think it's telling about some of the tendencies that we find on the modern left. And then we're going to react to a longer video, which is an interview on the Katie Halper show of Christian Parenti, Michael Parenti's son, who has very interesting things to say about diversity and how diversity ideology functions in the modern day as a tool for the ruling class, even though it has a somewhat progressive veneer covering it. So without further ado, we're going to roll into our introduction and then roll into the segments that I have just outlined.
Hey everybody, welcome to another Midwestern Marx live stream. I hope you liked that little intro there. I know I did. When I first saw it, I was very excited. It was made by a fan of ours. So thank you so much for that. How are you doing tonight, Carlos? We haven't talked like this in a while.
Yeah, well, I've been pretty crappy for a week. I was feverish for a couple of days, and then I rolled into the stage of the sickness where I had a cough for a few days and sniffles. So I'm coming out the other side of it now, but I'll probably let loose of a few coughs that are somewhat abnormal for me. But I'm coming out the other side. I haven't been sick in like maybe 5 years, so it's I don't know if I had COVID or what it was that I had, but it was not fun, and I'm happy to be able to somewhat be breathing more stably now and be able to concentrate, do some reading, and do a stream. I'd love doing these streams.
Yeah, I bet. I'm going to tell you what you tell me literally every time I even say I'm like feeling tired or anything. Take vitamin C.
Oh, yes. Yeah. I'm surprised I haven't.
Western Marx panacea, right?
Yeah. It's I recommend it to everyone. I'm pretty bold with who I recommend it to. So like, even if it's someone of like the chancellor or something. I remember I was having a conversation after graduation with one of these top figures in the school, and they were telling me how they had sniffles or something, and I told them, you got to take vitamin C. I just tell everyone that I meet, irrespective of who they are. But yeah, it's this one old Cuban that told my dad one day to do it, and he did it, and it worked for him. And then I've been doing it ever since, and it's been like 8 years. And I do it also to whenever I'm just lacking concentration and I need to work, I'll pop 6 vitamin C's in, and I got Eddie to start doing it as well 3 years ago. So he's been somewhat addicted to vitamin C as well. But it's out of the addictions you can have, it's one of the healthier ones I imagine.
Yeah, I take one every morning. They're great. I think it's really important to take care of your body as well as your mind.
Right.
I just want to highlight this real quick. This might sound weird, but the first time I saw Noah, I thought it was just Eddie with a beard. It is. I'm
Yeah.
actually Eddie. I grew a beard and really just let myself go.
Right. Yeah, you look like you could be like Eddie's father or something.
Maybe I am. Oh God. Um, no, that's a joke. So yeah, I mean, I was kind of out of communication for a while as well. I was in Mexico for a week with my wife and my father-in-law. We went down to Cancun, which was really cool. He a lifelong union pipe fitter, and he's always wanted to golf in Cancun. So we were able to take him there for his 70th birthday. We stayed at a cool hotel. What was interesting though was the minute we get there, and airports are horrible and the flight sucked, blah blah blah. But we get there, and the company that we booked everything through, they use taxi drivers union guys as their drivers. And the guy was telling us, hey, there's a big delay on the roads, there's a lot of traffic, so we're going to be late getting to the hotel. We're like, what are we going to do? Whatever. What's crazy is in Cancun, they sell like beer and margaritas and stuff right at the airport. So like people are just like partying it up. But so we finally get in this shuttle and we're going back to the hotel, and we start driving past a bunch of federales, in trucks, assault rifles on them. There's like 4 in the back on each side, and there's this one rich lady in the van with us, the shuttle, and she keeps going, oh my god, what is this? And he's kind of saying under his breath, and he tells her, like, there's a union action going on. So I start talking to him about this, and at the same time in very broken Spanish, trying to explain to him that not all Americans are stupid and that kind of thing. But what I'm trying to get at really is the labor movement in Mexico. From what we saw of it, we just right away we got in with these union guys. It was great. They're really, really militant, and things are very serious. The army, or I don't know if it was the army, maybe some sort of National Guard, came in to break up the highway that had been blocked off by the cab drivers. What they're trying to do is prevent Uber from coming onto the peninsula and into Cancun, where they rely on tourism dollars. And the unions are making sure that's what, working Mexicans are able to live on. So it was really important that they were doing this. So we really didn't mind waiting. And we got to hang out with him a little bit, talked about him and labor movement here and there. They're all big AMLO guys. So yeah, it was a good time. Other than that, it was great. I literally got half of my book done while I was down there without any distractions. So yeah, it was a good time.
Yeah, I wonder what AMLO's position on that was, because I have quite a few friends in Morena that are they're part of the Communist Party members in Mexico that are in Morena, that are in the part of the ruling party now. And I know that there's a big right-wing backlash. So it'd be interesting to see where AMLO has been in all of this. I'm sure it's been in a position favorable to the taxi drivers. Also, his past seems to indicate that he's pro-labor. He's definitely pro-anti-imperialist. And he's been at the forefront of calling out imperialism in Latin America, even quicker than countries like Bolivia that are explicitly socialist. So, but yeah, that's very interesting. With that, I guess
a positive view of Uber,
Right. Part of the sinister thing with Uber, and I wrote about this maybe 2.5 years ago when Prop 22 was passed in California, is that it's a way to remove workers' rights without actively making it seem as a fight between capital and labor, because all it does is take the worker and classify him as an independent contractor. And
Mhm.
so the worker ends up getting the sort of pseudo small capitalist category. And because of that categorization, the capitalist isn't uh, responsible for giving the worker the benefits and the the things that have been won for by the labor movement over years. So it's a crushing defeat to organize labor, and it's a very sinister way that capital is using to fight back against labor. And it's being done not just in these automobile industries and these transportation industries, excuse me, but also in rail. There's a lot of independent contractor hires in the railroads, and it's something that I don't see talked about quite often, but it's one of the more nefarious ways that the democratic rights that working people have won and their labor struggles are being rolled back.
Yeah, 100%, brother. I mean, Uber itself was basically a big union busting scam. I
Right.
mean, even especially in New York, cab drivers were pretty powerful and
Mhm.
won a lot of really important battles. And what it does, like you said, it removes the battle itself from possibly existing by changing it. And I think this is something, you're right, we don't pay enough attention to it these days. And that's really sad. They call it the Uberization of
Mhm.
industries, right?
And it's
But
happening in different ways in other industries as well under this more general aura of flexibilization, right?
yeah,
Um,
they 1022 you, right?
right. And the the sort of joke that I've made about it, it might be a little obscene, but it's just it they want you to be flexible because by being flexible they can fuck you easier. That's the real thing. It's flexibility for whom, right? For
Mhm.
working class people, it means more precarity, less guarantee of benefits, a more difficult ground on which to wage a struggle for better living conditions. For the capitalists, it means all the opposite, an easier worker to control and to get rid of at will whenever that's what the interest of capital requires. But um, I
Well,
guess with that.
yeah, just real quick, there's really no investment whatsoever in means of selling transportation, right? They
Mhm.
don't have to buy cars. They don't have to keep them up. They don't have to bring them up to safety standards, buy insurance, none of that. That's all on the independent contractor. And I mean, the pay is very, very obviously much lower than
Mhm.
union cab drivers get, you know?
Right, right. And I think it follows a more general logic that is indispensable in order to achieve things. I would say pretty much in any state, but especially in the stage of capitalism that we're in, which is that in order to achieve the ends that benefit the small ruling class, you have to code it in a way in which it seems nice for everyone else. It seems like you're doing it out of benevolent reasons. And they used to do this with child labor. Now, that's one of the things that I quoted in that old paper that I did on Prop 22. That you would say, child labor builds virtue, and if without a child working, how is the family supposed to survive? But it made it seem like keeping child laborers was something that was done because the capitalists were these altruistic people that actually cared about poor working class people. And the same thing is done today. You have a difficult everyday life that will be made easier by having a flexible schedule and by not having,
Mhm.
to have these relationships, which would make, in reality, your living standard a lot better because we would be required to give you more. So there's that discourse that says one thing, but in reality is something else. I think it's one of the things that it's most interesting to explore. And in part today, we're going to be talking about the role that identity politics plays in functioning in a similar way and presenting a pretty picture for something that in reality is not so pretty. It's putting a excuse my French, but putting a turd in a nice Christmas box and giving it to working people. So I guess with that we can jump into our first discussion about the horrors of. Oh, we got a super chat. Third Red Scare is coming. Be careful, everyone. Also, unrelated, the USA needs more trains. Absolutely. We just did a segment a few weeks ago about the trains in the U.S. and comparing them to China, and man,
No
we need
comparison.
there's no comparison, right? Right. You take the poorest cities in China and you compare them to the richest cities in the U.S., and there's not even a ground to compare them. You know, the the high speed rail that China has, the U.S. doesn't even have. The rail that we do have, it's all messed up. The
Mm.
rail stations are disgusting. They're they're poverty ridden, and they're dirty. They're crime ridden often, and that's not to condemn the people that are forced into those situations. It's the system that creates those sorts of conditions. But yeah, having nice rail would be awesome. And one
Yeah.
of the things that I mentioned when we were reacting to that was that the average working person spends usually about an hour or so driving to and from work, and that's time that you got to be paying attention to the wheel. You can't be like reading a book.
Mhm.
uh, you can't be like writing. I mean, you can, but you'd be pretty reckless, and you'd probably die like in a month or something. But
You know,
you could
have
do
you
that if you're
actually?
on a train. On a train you could do that, but yeah.
Yeah. Have you actually been on trains in New York or LA, the two like rich cities?
Mm.
I lived in LA and I took the metro everywhere. I got mugged on the metro once. When I got stabbed, it was getting off a metro train. Um, Maybe I'll tell you all that story sometime, not tonight. But in New York, the last time I was there, we took the subway, and at three different stops, literally three different stops, there was human feces on the ground in the train station. I mean, it's just full of graffiti. It's all rusted and falling apart. There's no security. There's no one cleaning up. It's just gross and it's sad. And it's a very big comment on what's become of this country. When that was built, I mean, look what it could have done, and now look at it.
Absolutely. You can't just pull up and say you got stabbed and mugged on a train and just stumble over it like some did. But we'll
Well,
have to address that maybe at some other point. But
I can say this: don't try to run from muggers after being stabbed in the butt cheek. It doesn't work.
I haven't been stabbed in the butt cheek, but as a avid runner, once I went to go pet a German Shepherd and I got bit in the ass. And I'm
Oof.
sure that the feeling might not be comparable, but it's almost there. It's the closest thing to being that. But okay, let's roll into the first segment of today, which is the horrors of socialism, which we actually have here to ready to pull up.
For
So this was
anyone,
a resolution that was promoted by Maria Salazar. She's a Cuban American from Florida, and for those that don't know, in South Florida, Miami more specifically, and um, a little bit in Tampa as well, you have a heavy Cuban American community, and this process of immigration has happened in waves. The first wave was the people that were directly influenced um, uh, by the Batista dictatorship, that they were in favor of the Batista dictatorship. They were in class positions, that they benefited from that condition that Cuba was put in, and they fled to the U.S. And one of the things that's hardly ever mentioned is the fact that they took Cuba's gold reserves with them. So they came here and they were able to build massive wealth, and the opposite of that was that also the reserves that Cuba had were gone. So were resources that the revolution wasn't able to use. But throughout the years, there have been various reasons for why Cubans have emigrated and left the country. There's usually what Helen Yaffe calls a push-pull dialectic at play, where the U.S. Hybrid warfare against Cuba, the sanction regime, creates extremely difficult objective conditions for everyday Cubans. And, regardless of how much of a revolutionary consciousness you have, it's difficult to have to ration things so that everyone can survive, and those are conditions that Cuba is put in because of the U.S. blockade. Those are not conditions that are a result of socialism or the government or any of that. Those are conditions that are put because of the blockade. And then on top of that, in order for that to work, you also have the pull factor, which is the fact that Cubans get here to the U.S. and they get pretty much everything from the government. They have the ability to have a speedy process to become citizens. They get benefits very, very quickly, while similar immigrants from the Caribbean, Haitians, come here and they don't get any of that. They get sent back to their country. But they do it with Cubans because it helps them feed the atrocity propaganda about Cuba. They create conditions so that if Cubans want to leave the island, they can't just leave with a visa because the U.S. is not giving them visas and they're not letting other countries give them visas to come to the U.S. And so they are forced to come to the U.S. through illegal means. The most traditional one has been coming through the Florida Strait, through the ocean, where many lives have been lost. But that creates really good atrocity propaganda for the U.S., where they're able to say, wow, look, communism is so horrible. People are willing to risk their life in the ocean to come to America, which is so great. And in reality, the conditions in Cuba have been made difficult by the U.S., and the good conditions that they might find in the U.S. are very unique to them in order so that they can perpetuate that narrative that's anti-Cuba and against the Cuban Revolution. I've developed, I've worked a lot in this field. So if you want more details, I recommend a presentation that I did a while back titled something along the lines of the July 26th movement. And we have it on the Midwestern Marks YouTube. But um, this comes from that group of people that have been the prime factor in the U.S. in sustaining the blockade and in perpetuating it. Because literally, the whole world has been voting for 30 years straight in favor of lifting the U.S.'s blockade against Cuba. And it's usually just the U.S. and Israel who vote against the lifting of the blockade. So that's the sort of context of the type of person that brought this resolution up to the floor. But nonetheless, before we get deeper into it, I want to show who voted for it. Every Republican voted for it. So I don't know what else to say there. But 109 Democrats voted for it. More Democrats voted for it than the ones that didn't vote for it. So I think that that's something to keep in mind, especially in the context of a country that has voted consistently against a bill that would prohibit the glorification of Nazism. So on the one hand, you have a country that wants to exaggerate the horrors of socialism while voting against bills which would combat the glorification of Nazism. So glorifying Nazism is okay. Talking about socialism in any other way which doesn't focus on what they call horrors, which are 99% bullshit, is not okay. So that's the state that our country's in. And as someone had mentioned in the private chat, yes, not in the private chat, in the chat, yes, we are indeed in a third major red scare, and I think this bill is part and parcel of that comment. But Noah, um, you had pulled up
Yeah.
the
So before we get to the resolution itself, which is wackadoo and has all sorts of misinformation from it, straight from the Black Book of Communism and other just silly lies about socialism. They do this not just for Cuba, but for everything, right? The entire idea is to try their hardest to strangle a country, strangle the independence of a people and their efforts to bring themselves a better life, and then go, look how bad socialism is. It did this, right? Which is just beyond it. Beyond going into what we always say about it, I think what's important here is that in our era, I think people are waking up to that. And I think that's why I don't think it's coming. I think we're knee deep in a third red scare right now. But in this new form with our new bourgeois ideology, right? And the new sort of way the middle classes work with reproletarianization happening and the PMC having such a big presence on the left. That said, though, yeah, let's just start right from the beginning. It's Congress Resolution 9, and it begins, whereas socialist ideology necessitates a concentration of power that is time and time again collapsed into communist regimes, totalitarian rule, and brutal dictatorships. So that's the first line. I don't know what collapsing into a communist regime means. Sounds nonsensical, but totalitarian rule is something that we should get mostly into on this. Though I do want to touch on the brutal dictatorships. They can just say these things, right? Because Americans aren't taught how other countries do things, right? We just listen to and believe the ruling class. If we look into how the Soviet Union functioned, for example, or how People's China functions right now, they're incredibly democratic societies. The problem is that the bourgeoisie see only their form, right, of democracy as what is democratic, which is formal liberal democracy, serving the bourgeoisie or democracy for the bourgeoisie. And anything outside that, they call a dictatorship. But we could get into the totalitarianism thing, which I think is a little more interesting. What about you, Carlos?
Yeah. So I think that by collapsing, what they're referring to is like reducing, like power is reduced to the small group of bureaucrats, and that's part of the narrative that's always embedded. And that's just not true. If you look at the political structures of the People's Republic of China, of Cuba, which is having elections coming up, of the Soviet Union, of any of the countries that have been led by a communist party, you would see that they are infinitely more democratic, even in that shallow realm which bourgeois pundits consider to be democracy, which is showing up to a booth to vote. In terms of voting, there's voting much more consistently, and there's much more political participation in that electoral form in socialist countries than there are in capitalist countries. In capitalist countries, you go to the booth every 2 years. It might be every 4 years. It might be not at all. You have a condition where 30% of the people vote in their local elections. It means 70% of people available to vote are not participating in the democratic process. In presidential elections, it's usually around high 50s to 60%. It's been a little bit higher in the last two elections, but that's still, a good 40 to 30% of adults who would be able to vote not participating in the political process at the federal level. Why is that? Why is it that, you look at those same numbers in Cuba and in China, and they're in the 90s? So who's more democratic? Who's more democratic if even by your very shallow standards of democracy as the ability to participate in elections, there's more elections and more participation in socialist countries? And then you have to look at what is democracy. What is democracy? It's composed of two words, demos and kratos. Demos doesn't just mean people in general. If you pull up a Wall Street banker, he wouldn't be considered people under the definitions of traditional Grecian democracy. Demos means common people. You can use the concept of, in Spanish, is el pueblo, the people. That's what the popular classes, that's what demos means. And kratos means power. It means the ability for regular working people to exert power over their everyday affairs. And we have to ask ourselves, does the US have that? And the reality is that it's been proven from the start that that's not the case. Even Ivy League studies out of Princeton are showing that it is statistically proven that the people who win are the people that get the most funding on a 95% rate. It is statistically proven that when the vast majority of people want something to pass, if big elite interest doesn't want it to pass, it will not pass. And if the vast majority of people do not want something to pass, if elite interests want it to pass, it will pass. So what does that tell you? The people that control what passes and what doesn't are the elite, the billionaires, what Bernie and the Wall Street movement called the top 1%, the monopoly capitalists. Those are the people that control what goes and what doesn't go in our political system. And to sit here and talk about democracy, about communist totalitarianism, about collapsing power into a communist regime and to a bureaucratic X, Y, or Z, it's completely absurd. It's pure projection. If you want to look at actual totalitarianism, if you want to look at an actual dictatorship that benefits a minority group, you have to look at U.S. capitalism, U.S. finance capitalism. That's what you have to look at. You might find a dictatorship of a different kind in socialist countries, one in which it's the people who can dictate their way into governance and push away the interests of the exploiting classes so that they don't have influence in political affairs. That's a type of dictatorship. We call it the dictatorship of the proletariat, or a democratic people's dictatorship, or the dictatorship of the peasants and the proletariat. There's different concepts that we've used in the past to describe that. But that sort of dictatorship is much more democratic because it embodies what democracy is. It's common people wielding power for the sake of common people. You don't have that in the U.S. And you have that in these countries that are being denounced by these idiots for being horrors.
And I think one of the reasons you see such low voter turnout, and a lot of the sort of rad lib types will say, oh, it's all voter suppression. And yes, that plays into it. But one of the main reasons is that regular people, the demos, or that we understand inherently that we have no power, that what we do essentially doesn't matter to them. They're going to do what they want regardless. I mean,
Absolutely.
Why would you vote for something that doesn't change your life? It's getting worse for you regardless, either way,
Yes. Do we want to keep going with some of the statements?
Yep. The next one is my favorite. Whereas socialism has repeatedly led to famine and mass murders and the killing of, ready for it, over 100 million people worldwide. This statistic is from what's called the Black Book of Communism, whose main author was criticized by other authors attached to the project as lying and going out of his way to hit this magic 100 million number, which he was obsessed with.
One of the statistics is literally a story that's told from Churchill, that Churchill asked Stalin, how many people have you killed? And Stalin was like, and so Churchill took supposedly him lifting his two hands to mean 10 million. And that's a statistic that is in the book, that is in this book. So, I mean,
not only that, they also count invading Nazi soldiers who were there to exterminate us or them, who were there to invade the country and destroy it, killing and enslaving everyone they saw along the way. Those are counted as victims of communism in this 100 million number. Other things that are considered are children that weren't born, right? Because World War II was happening and the Great Patriotic War. So people were having less children at the time. So they do all this fancy math. And by the way, the book was also criticized for having remedial math errors in it, meaning it's pretty good bet they did that math wrong on purpose to inflate the number.
And the sad part is that it doesn't matter for the vast majority of people in the country. And it doesn't matter because all of these things, regardless of how false they are, they've been embedded in the popular consciousness of people through movies, through schools, through popular culture. It's all over the place. And it's the sort of statement that you can make without having to cite anything because everyone already agrees with it. Mm-hmm. And what does that do to scholarship? If you're not forced to hold up a standard of scholarship where if you're going to say that there's a crime, you have to show one, that the deaths that you're saying actually existed. Two, that they were intentional. If they don't have to prove that, if they don't have to prove that, they have the ability, they have a blank check to just say, they could have bumped that number up to 1 billion people. And
Mhm.
it really wouldn't have mattered.
No, they could say whatever they want, and it always plays on people just not checking, right? We get so much information just thrown at us that it's impossible to verify all of it. But it's really important that we do if we're interested in the truth, which we need to change things, right? I also think the other parts of this are interesting. It has repeatedly led to famine and mass murders, which one isn't true. Every time socialism has arisen in a country after a workers' revolution or a peasants' revolution, they've ended famines in areas that historically were victims of them. And mass murders is absurd. I don't know what they're calling mass murder. Maybe the Nazis that were killed in World War II. I don't know. But let's just say that's all because communism, right? And we even count the Nazis. Why is capitalism not denounced for this same reason? Capitalism has literally actually created famines and hunger right now, right? Um, Not to mention imperialist wars. The invasion of Iraq killed what, 1 million people? How many people did Obama drone bomb? Innocent civilians. All of there are millions and millions and millions of people dying specifically because of capitalism. And that's not denounced at all, you know?
Or if, just look at the history, not just today, right?
Mhm.
Today, the millions, but historically, how many piles of millions of dead bodies were necessary for capitalism to get started and to develop the wealth that it did in the core countries in Europe and the US? I mean, that's always ignored. Um,
Precisely. Not to mention chattel fucking sorry to swear. Chattel fucking slavery, right? Capitalism would not have come into existence and would not have grown into imperialism without chattel slavery providing the cotton for the textile industry, right?
it was literally known as the Cotton Kingdom. It
Exactly.
provided it was the essence of not just industrial capitalism in the north, but the essence of European capitalism. It was so fundamental that the British considered intervening in the American Civil War on the side of the South in order to protect the people that were getting them the cotton that they needed for their industries and to produce the commodities that they were producing and selling to the whole world. That's how big a role slavery played for 400 years in the development of the capitalist economy throughout various stages. So, to sit here and talk about the crimes of communism, I mean, it's a joke, especially when the people that they're pointing at, I mean, who do they bring up? They bring up, of course, Soviet leaders, Lenin and Stalin, Mao Zedong, Fidel Castro, Pol Pot, maybe. Okay, yes, but he was propped up by the CIA. Kim Jong Un, Kim Jong Il, Daniel Ortega, Hugo Chavez, Nicolas Maduro. All of these people, the difficulties that they have experienced in their constructions of socialism have almost as a whole been rooted in the efforts of imperialism to thwart their revolutionary constructions. The
And
Soviet
why?
Union, as soon as it's born, 14 invading countries come to kill the baby in its crib, and they fail. Cuba, as soon as it starts its socialist project, blockade from what was historically Cuba's natural trading partner, which not only forces Cuba not to be able to trade with its historically and geographically natural trading partner, but not be able to trade with the whole world because of that's the control that the U.S. had over, and has over the rest of the world, or the vast majority of the world. What happens, the same thing happens in Venezuela. You have a couple years of the revolutionary process and they literally fucking kidnap Hugo Chavez, and they're forced to put him back after 3 days because the people were just going crazy in the streets to have them back. what happens in China. It was literally isolated from the whole world until the late 70s when it finally was able to open up. And what sorts of compromises did it need to do in order to open up? What sorts of activities? What was it supports? Was it in a way forced to not support or to support in order to continue having access to that global market? So the failures that you can find, quote unquote failures that you can find in socialism, if you don't understand those in the intense pressures that are created by imperialist hybrid warfare, in the fact that socialism, as Michael Parenti said, is always siege socialism. It's socialism having to construct itself under constant warfare from outside, from inside, of different forms of biochemical warfare, physical warfare, propaganda warfare, economic warfare, different forms of warfare. If you don't analyze the quote unquote flaws of socialism in that context, you're not going to understand anything. That's like showing up to the example I always give, showing up to a boxing fight on the 12th round and judging the whole fight on the basis of the 12th round. It's taking the fact that you're looking at and separating it from the factors that allowed the fact to be. And that's why we say that dialectics is so important, because if you want to understand the world, you have to look at the totality, at all the parts that make possible the one thing that you're looking at. If you don't do that, you are judging by definition a book by its cover.
You need all of the factors that make up the fact, that make that fact that particular fact. Henry Winston once said that the bourgeoisie have no coherent understanding of cause and effect, specifically because of this. And it just shows you that they can assign blame almost arbitrarily. And a lot of them know they're lying, but some of them actually believe these things. They believe that you can just stop thinking and go, oh, communism must just cause these things. We don't have to look any further and actually say, oh, this led to this. This was determined by that, etc. It's absurd, almost as absurd as the next part of the resolution, which goes, whereas tens of millions died in the Bolshevik Revolution, which is not true, by the way. The Bolshevik Revolution was incredibly bloodless. It was a civil war afterwards where a lot of people died. And you know who started that? The czars, right? The whites did. And I mean, like the White Guard and blah, blah, blah. It continues. At least 10 million people were sent to the gulags in the USSR, and millions more starved in the terror famine Holodomor in Ukraine. So let's tag into this.
You remember that country, the Soviet Union, which had 4%? I don't know if I'm freezing, but do you remember that murderous, tyrannous government that with 4% of the world's population had 25% of the world's gulag members?
Mm-hmm.
That was the Soviet Union, right? Was it?
Yeah, totally. Oh, no. Oh, wait. No, that's us right now, right?
That's us right now. Right. Yeah. This resolution makes perfect sense.
So let's go into this a little bit. First, they use the word gulag to scare you. You know what gulag actually means in Russian? It means the administration of rehabilitation. So the bureaucracy that figures out how to rehabilitate people. And it gets attached to the prisons, right? Of course, because back when the whole world was at this point when there were gulags, so to speak, everyone had this understanding that prison labor was progressive, was incredibly progressive, actually, because it took criminals and it taught them a trade. It taught them how to be, productive members of society. In the 50s, almost every country in the world, or the industrialized countries, ended prison labor, including the USSR. Guess which country kept it around? Ours, right? And it still continues on today. Another fun fact about the gulags: at the very height of imprisonment, during the buildup and invasion by the Nazi fascist hordes that were coming to exterminate everyone, when there was just fear all over the country because there were Nazi spies, there were counter-revolutionaries sabotaging factories, trying to sowed division and discord in the people. Even at the height of imprisonment because of that, when there were a lot of innocents locked away because of Yezhov Shina and the counter-revolution regarding him, etc., it wasn't even half of the Americans locked up right now per capita. Not even half. That's insane that they can talk about the gulag being the scary police state thing when it's not even half of what we have right here.
I also want to bring
you're cutting out a little bit, brother.
I think I froze, but I also want to bring up this comment by.
You're good.
Am I okay now?
Oh, I think
I also want to bring up this comment by Red Horizon. Am I freezing?
Yeah, a little bit. I'll read it and then you can talk about it. Red Horizon says, not to mention that socialism had to develop in a way that capitalism never has, without colonialism, slavery, land theft, or super exploitation. All right, I think Carlos is trying to figure out his computer. Oh, you're good. You're good. Go ahead, brother. Nope, you're not.
Yeah. Well, you read the comment already. I think that's such an important thing to look at, because it's very easy to look at the wealth that European and the U.S. Has been able to achieve, and it's very easy to look at it and forget, what were the factors that allowed that fact to be a fact, and the factors are a plethora. The factors are colonialism, slavery, genocide, continual imperialist policy that super exploits people from around the world, that extracts resources of nations from around the world at a very, very low cost, and that's what the wealth that you find in the West. It's a wealth that has been robbed from both the laborers that built those things here and from the resources that were taken from colonized nations of the global South. That's not socialism. In socialism case, the two quickest developments in human productive history have been the Soviet Union under collectivization, which, if they want to mention Holodomor, which is a myth. There was a famine, but that it was intentional was a myth. But it was the last famine that occurred in an area that was prone to famines. And why was that? Because socialism worked, because it industrialized quicker than it had ever done before, without slavery, without genocide, without colonialism, without imperialism. And then after the Soviet Union did that, the second quickest, the second time that record would be broken and a country would be the quickest in developing ever before would be China. After 7 years with reform and opening up, and look at where China is today. You look at even the poorest cities in China, and they are better and nicer and have less polarizing inequalities than the US and then Western Europe. So you have to ask, where are the roots of the wealth that each sort of society has created? And in socialism, it's been created in an honest way, without oppression, without exploitation. And the West has been created with genocide, with enslavement, with exploitation, with the most evil things possible coming to mind.
When we talk about this, I want to... You're freezing a little bit again, brother. But when we talk about this, I want to point one thing out. All that wealth that is extracted by the parasites in our ruling class, they like to pretend that this is all of us, that we all, get a share in this, that the wealth trickles down, right? But nothing could be further from the case. The working classes of the USA have had to fight, bleed, and die for every scrap that we have, for children to not have to work anymore, for women to be allowed to work, to end slavery, to end Jim Crow, to get things like weekends, to not have to work 16-hour days. All of these, every dollar is fought for despite that ruling class. And then afterwards, they act as if they just magnanimously handed it out because they're fair operators, right? Nothing could be further from the case. They kill and they steal and they keep it for themselves.
And you still see mass social polarization as you do today, where 60% of Americans are a paycheck away from joining the 600,000 Americans wandering the streets in a country where there's 33 times more homes than homeless people. Yeah, sure, you have big buildings that are nowhere near as nice as the big ones in China, but you have people in the streets, homeless. You have hungry people.
A block from my house, there is a 7-Eleven that families eat out of the dumpster from. Families eating out of the dumpster in the richest country in the world. That should not happen, right? A fifth of our children go to bed hungry. And not only is it over 60% of people are a paycheck away from homelessness, all of these people are working paycheck to paycheck. That's why they're like that. We are stuck in this role where we cannot get ahead. Reproletarianization means the death of the middle class. That middle class that was fought for and won, and then the racist form of it fought against as well, is gone now, right? When we take things back from them, they take it right back from us, which needs to teach us the lesson that there's only one way to end this shit. Sorry to swear.
Absolutely. Is there anything of substance worth bringing up? Or I think it's just going into pretty much details. Maybe we could skip down to the Declaration of Independence comments. Do you want to read that?
Yeah. So the rest is just more of the same nonsense. But it does go, whereas the author of the Declaration of Independence, President Thomas Jefferson, wrote, to take from one because it is thought that his own industry and that of his fathers has acquired too much in order to spare to others who or whose fathers have not exercised equal industry and skill is to violate arbitrarily the first principle of association, the guarantee to every one of a free exercise of his industry and the fruits acquired by it. Now let's think about this in relation to how the bourgeoisie see themselves, right? Because what they're doing is taking all the fruits of everyone else's labor and then acting as if it's their own industry, their own labor that produced it, when nothing could be further from the truth. Jefferson wasn't a fool, right? He knew his class interests. And if we'll go into this, maybe we won't, as it's already getting a little late, but Madison continued. He'll go. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Carlos. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves.
Right. If you want to look at a class which works and doesn't have the fruit of its work, that has the fruit of its work taken from it, look at the vast majority of American people. It's called the working class. And that's the class that socialism upholds. And that's the condition that socialism abolishes. Capitalism creates a condition where a small group of people function as parasites. They can bum around all day, not doing anything, and taking the wealth that's created by millions and millions of people. That's the system that we have right now. So if you're honest about having the people that work for something be the ones that get it, then you have to expropriate the owners of capital that are backing the idiots which promoted a resolution like this. You have to take away their wealth and nationalize it and give it to the American working class, which is the one that created that wealth. That's
straight.
what you have to do.
If you want to spread a little class consciousness, and Carlos may be getting sick of this one since I say it all the fucking time, but God, I keep swearing. I apologize. Since I say this all the time, though, this is easy. Do this anywhere, right? Every worker understands that we wake up every morning and we spend the majority of our day, meaning the majority of our waking hours of our lives, making somebody else rich, right? Somebody that ain't working for that money, that's just sucking it out of us, right? We're sitting around, we're doing the labor, they're getting rich off it. Anytime you go to a gas station, right? They say, "How you doing?" Go, "Oh, tired as hell. How about you?" And when they say, "How about the same?" That's when you hit them with that. Go, "That's what happens when they got us spending all day making them rich, isn't it?" It works. It works all the time.
Absolutely. And there's another point that could be made here, which is a point that I've been trying to do in my work, which is if you look at the more progressive, although of course very much flawed, but the more progressive parts of the revolutionary tradition, people like Paine, people like Jefferson, who were red baited at their time by Madison and called foreign agents because they supported the French Revolution, and called anarchists and atheists at their time, which was the first case of red baiting in the US of A. If you look at these thinkers, they themselves were wary about the role that the interests of capital played in undermining some of the rights that they felt that they had fought for in 1776. And
That's
there's a lot of quotes that are that make this explicit. And if you follow the trail from the more progressive parts of this tradition, the first generation that comes right after them, upholding the Jeffersonian democratic values, whatever, regardless of how you interpret this tradition, the first people that come out of that are the first generation of socialists in the 1820s and 1830s. People like Cornelius Blatchley, Langdon Bilsby, Thomas Skidmore, William McClure. All these people felt that the logical and practical conclusion of the Declaration of Independence and of the Jeffersonian democratic ideals was socialism. And the whole tradition of socialism in the US, which is extremely rich and goes back to the founding of the country, basically, that whole tradition has appealed to a document that is now being used to uphold anti-communism.
Not only that, Thomas Jefferson himself told Robert Owen that his utopian socialism was a really good and noble idea, right? He just said that he doubted that it would work on a large scale. He said it was beautiful, I think was the word he used, in the Iroquois nation, and when they could see something like that happening. And I think that's important, to act as if Thomas Jefferson was some sort of laissez-faire economist is so completely misreading everything about Jefferson, who thought of himself as sort of the moral version of John Locke, right?
Right.
Where property rights were defended, but for Jefferson, it was about morality and going beyond that. And this is why life, liberty, and property from Locke becomes life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
And even when property is brought up, and they still do this, capitalists still do this, they describe capitalist private property in the form which Marx described self-earned private property.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not self-earned private property. It's not like the ideal Lockean subject that tills the ground and what he produces is his private property. That's not the private property we're dealing with today. We're dealing with people who own massive industries that employ millions of people and that get the fruits of what they do. That's what the private property that we're talking about is. So it's this self-earned private property myth. This hasn't existed for 300 years.
Which, by the way, is far closer to feudal aristocratic land privilege and inheriting it from a family than it is anything else, right? If these people were around right now, they would be criticizing monopoly capitalism along with all of us. The Communist Party used to say that if they were around now, they'd be communists. Yeah. This is absolutely true. And especially, like, forget about Jefferson for a minute. Thomas Paine, he broke with the Sons of Liberty and criticized them all to the point where none of them attended his funeral when he died. Mm-hmm. Agrarian justice was a complete condemnation of what he saw as the betrayal of the noble ideas of the bourgeois revolution. And I would put him almost on par with Jefferson in the ideological leadership of the Sons of Liberty.
Yeah, yeah. Without common sense, you couldn't have, or it was a very important, almost close to a nodal point for the revolution. I don't want to say that it was, the main thing. That would be idealist, but it was a very important ideological document for the revolution. But do we want to move on, or do we have any closing comments that we want to give on this resolution? I think it might be worth.
Real quick, someone made a really good statement about Jefferson.
Okay.
GP Turismo says Jefferson was a conundrum. He was very social in his views, even talked against slavery, but held slaves. I always say that he's a perfect example of what Lacerda calls the dual nature of liberalism. The ability to talk about the inherent rights of man while owning other men, where he participates in the institution of slavery while condemning it and understanding it as inefficient and morally reprehensible. He actually, what was it that he said? He prayed for the souls of his sons if there was a just God. And he prayed that there wasn't because of what he'd done. Interesting man.
These are objective contradictions at play in the founding of the country.
For sure.
We don't want to reject that, by saying that there's a thread that you can pull that is present in common people's common sense, and that you can use that to get to socialism, does not mean in any which way or form that it is not the case that that these people didn't do in their life, horrendous things like own slaves and perpetuate, the colonialist expansion that dispossessed indigenous people of their lands, genocided them in some cases, or in many cases. So they did do horrible things, but certain parts of their thought served as the ideological germs for the development of a very emancipatory tradition, which includes socialism, the abolitionist tradition, this women's suffrage movement, and other movements, the peace movement in the U.S., the civil rights movements, and the figure of MLK. I mean, he's embedded very much in this tradition. Part of what he's doing is asking America to live up to its ideals. But yeah, the very paradoxical document, and I think that if the U.S. left continues on this route of national nihilism, which is a concept that Stalin uses, that Lenin uses, that the Chinese use in basically every document. They call it historical nihilism. It's developed also by Georgy Dimitrov as one of the big mistakes that allow fascism to succeed. We cannot have national nihilism because it means rejecting our past and breaking ourselves off from the history that the American people consider to be fundamental in constructing their own identity. So if we continue on this path, it's going to continue to make sense in the heads of regular working people why you can have a resolution that says it upholds the more emancipatory parts of the Declaration of Independence on the one hand, while simultaneously condemning socialism, right? So if you have that national nihilism, you're doing their job for them. What they're doing here is separating the U.S., its history, its people, it's the people's values. They're separating that from socialism and saying there's no way these two can connect. And the left buys into this. And you can't have it. So by the left buying into this in the form of national nihilism, they're doing the ruling class's job for them. We cannot do that. Our task is to say, yeah, there was these horrific things that happened, and we should always have them in the tip of our mouths to say them. We should always be reminding people of them, but we should also remind people of the positive history of struggle that our country has, and that this history of struggle definitely is an arc that has been working itself towards communism since the beginning of this positive progressive history in the country. So if we don't do that, these splits that the ruling class is trying to lay make more and more sense in the minds of people.
Precisely. And this is the problem of the retreat of Marxism, right? Now that Marxism is back and communists are back, I think this is going to change, because this is a problem of not being able to think dialectically, not understanding the USA as in motion as a process of a thing becoming itself. And what I call the American trajectory is from the germ of the bourgeois revolution through the second revolution, the Civil War, and the civil rights movement and everything. It is this process of becoming itself as the progressive aspect, the nascent aspect, the developing aspect of the USA develops and becomes itself. The moribund or already developed aspect is undeveloping. Us developing and the working class movement for socialism developing is literally the undevelopment of the bourgeoisie. And so all of these things are overcoming things like socialism overcoming things like slavery, racism, etc., etc. The whole process of America is this progression, and this is what defines what the USA is for Marxism, right?
Right.
So
And
calling
I
it
think
just
you're.
based in slavery and all evil doesn't make sense in Marxism. It can only be said from a bourgeois liberal standpoint of moralism and judging people that exist today by the actions of people who died 200 years ago.
Absolutely. It's what I call in my work. I'm working on a book now. It's what I call the purity fetish. They hold on to the idea that because the history of the U.S. is not pure or purely up to their standards of what a good history would be, they reject it wholesale. And which means that in the process of doing that, they treat it in a very undialectical fashion, in a very synecdochal fashion, where they take a part of the U.S. history, the ugly part that's been headed by the ruling class, and they make it the whole history of the US, and they ignore the progressive struggles or treat the progressive struggles as if they were outside of the US fighting against it. And that is a fundamental inability to think dialectically. Because thinking dialectically is not just, looking at things in their development, but looking at the engine which drives this development being the objective contradictions contained within a social totality. And if you're not able to see those objective contradictions, the fact that there has been a progressive tendency and a reactionary pro-capitalist tendency, if you can't see that, you cannot see the development. You can't see anything. All you can see is a phantom that you have propped up for yourself that says, oh, America is a static entity, which is just settler colonialism, genocide, slavery, blah, 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 blah. And therefore, I'm going to let the ruling class take full ownership of the progressive and the good parts and the bad and all parts of the country's history, which means that only the ruling class will have the ability to connect itself to the traditions that the American people accept. That is giving the way to fascism. That is giving the way to fascism. And that's something that Stalin was very clear on. And it's something that Dimitrov was very clear on. If you leave the history of your people to the ruling class will not wait a second in using it in order to turn those people against socialism and against communism.
I also want to say, while we're on this topic, reaction is contextual. Everything is contextual, right? Reaction is a form, right? It's a universal. It is the notion that there is some idyllic past we need to go back to. So think about the woke versions of reaction we hear these days, right? That we can just turn back the clock and undo what's been done. We can't ever undo what's been done. We need to come to terms with it and understand it dialectically in a process of one class overcoming another and the different forms that takes as the struggle plays out over time. There's a very misunderstood quote from Dimitrov where he talks about how fascism is the open terroristic dictatorship of the most chauvinistic, most reactionary faction of finance capital. This is absolutely correct. The problem is people who aren't Marxists misreading Dimitrov and thinking reaction and chauvinism is just whatever the Republican Party seems to be doing at the time, or Donald Trump or whatever it is. No, reaction must be a particular take particular form in order to actually arise and be concrete. If it doesn't, then it's not a real thing, right? And as it arises in the concrete, it is that particular situation that gives it its shape, that determines what it looks like. And in our era, there is a new bourgeois ideology that develops out of this new era of technology, post civil rights, post new left, post civil war, even all of this, right? And so we have to reanalyze what reaction looks like. We have to reanalyze what social chauvinism looks like. Often today, that takes the form mostly of the remnants of the middle class and the bourgeoisie looking down on the entire proletariat here, either as, oh, poor them, we need to feel sorry for them, removing their agency as independent people, or stupid and backwards and racist, right? It's the same phenomenon in two different forms coming up that way.
Absolutely. And I wanted to address real quick before we hop on to our second segment. Dialectic has a progressive side and a reactionary side. Well, it depends on what sort of where you're looking at the dialectical phenomenon. If you're looking at society, we have a concept in Marxism, which is that something is progressive insofar as it's able to move society forward into a higher form of life, into a more developed mode of production. And so when you say that within the two primary principal poles of the social contradictions, the social polarization that you have under capitalism, being the working class and the owning class, when you say that the struggles of the working class are the progressive element, it means that out of those struggles, the potential for a qualitatively new society, a higher form of life, a higher form of production, a more efficient form of production, a more efficient set of relations of productions that allow the unleashing of the productive forces. That is what we mean by progressive. We don't mean by progressive, that it holds certain social views that are progressives, and reactionary, that it holds certain social views that are reactionary. Reactionary means holding the development of history back. And so insofar as this part of the left sees the project of socialism as negating the last 400 years and going back to this idyllic, romanticized past, it is reactionary. It wants to go back and not just keep history stuck at where it's been stuck for a while in a decaying and moribund imperialism, capitalist imperialism, but literally bring it back in time. And that is reactionary by definition.
Not to mention that there is also an anti-immigration sort of strain of that is really, really scary. And the way it manifests in people at the beginning, when they think they have a moral stance, isn't always how it ends up.
Okay. Do we want to go into the Bill Maher video, or do we want to tackle one of the are you still up for doing the 4 segments? We've gone a little bit overboard on that first one, and we've spent an hour and 13 minutes on it. But
That's what happens
to do the other 3, but I know that you go to bed early, so let me know.
That's what happens when we don't have Eddie to sort of rein us in, right?
Right.
We just overtalk everything. It is getting a little late here, unfortunately. I'd love to keep going or do those at a later date, but maybe just for tonight, since I have a very, very annoying job to get back to in the morning, maybe we'll just kind of finish out the night on this one, if that's cool with you. And
yeah, that's fine.
Go over some of the more and just make the whole stream just about the condemnation of socialism resolution. And while we're on the subject of that, just in general, I think it's very funny that there's never been a condemnation of fascism resolution, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
on the contrary,
right.
There is one combating the glorification of Nazism, neo-Nazism, and other practices that contribute to fueling contemporary forms of racism and bigotry. And the U.S. has voted against it every year. So we have a country that votes against condemning fascism and Nazism, and that votes in favor of condemning socialism.
Precisely. And not only that, based on a whole bunch of demonstrably false things. The facts they bring up in here are literally made up. They are not real. And if anyone has any questions on what the facts are on those, please feel free to ask. We can go over any of them. But all of these are lies. So they have put these lies in order to condemn socialism in the congressional record. And I think that is going to be important for them going forward. Because here's the thing, they're not scared of the woke people. They're not scared of Radlibs. They're not scared of Boyce and whoever else, right? They are only scared and have only ever been scared of us. We are who they created the fake left to defeat. We are who they send soldiers out to slaughter. We are who all the propaganda efforts of the last 100 years have been against. And as we reemerge in this era, we are going to see more and more things like this. We are going to see them try to redefine socialism a million times over and over again, and go back to the old ones as well. It's going to be more and more and more of this as we get bigger and organize more effectively, and the sort of reproletariat comes into being.
Absolutely. They are terrified of an organized working class movement that is anti-imperialist in character. And that is what I'm hoping that we are participating in the creation and in the reformation of, because God knows that tendencies that have claimed to do something similar have often just fallen into the politics of the PMC. And that's very tragic and it's very sad. And insofar as it does that, it presents a fetter towards the development of socialism in our country. But hopefully, things are beginning to change because they have to. I mean, conditions couldn't be any riper. I mean, there will be a little more riper in the coming year when the general crisis of capitalism hits again, a lot worse than it was in 2008. So get ready for that. But we should be preparing for this in the same way that a boxer approaches a match. We should be dedicating all of our energies to organizing working people, to debunking imperialist lies. For a variety of reasons, we're going to have a very good moment coming up for us to participate in revolutionary activity, and those moments don't come maybe 3 times in a person's lifespan, maybe less. And we're also at a moment where nuclear war is a very real potential in the near future, and that's very scary. Everyone dies there. Everyone fucking dies. So if you are presenting yourself as an obstacle to the struggle for socialism, you, you are acting in a very criminal manner at this moment in history. We have to dedicate all our energies to talking to working people, to bringing them into the movement, and to fighting for socialism today. Because if we won't do it, you're sure as shit that no one else will. So,
damn straight. I think in our recent Journal of American Socialist Studies, I explore some of the bases of how this arises by applying Gus Hall's theory of petty bourgeois radicalism. And for an upcoming project, I'm working on really expanding this idea to middle class radicalism and middle class reaction, and why they're often the same thing. And I think understanding that, especially because within the sort of reproletariat, there is a middle class social consciousness, because that's directly where these people are from, right? Their parents were middle class, and that life was denied them. That's what formed them, but they're stuck here with us now, right? It's all around us. On the left, the middle class dominated over the entire last period. the working class was abandoned. I used to say that the working class didn't abandon the left abandoned the working class. Right.
Quite explicitly. You literally have text from the most prominent figures in the left arguing that the working class is no longer revolutionary, that it's been absorbed into the existing state apparatuses, and that now to lead a revolution you have to turn towards the students. So that's those are the grandfathers of the left that we are fighting to transform today. So. Noah, I know you are a working man who gets up very early to do his duties both as a scholar and as a workman. So we're going to have to cut the stream a little bit short. I know we promised 4 segments, but we will be covering the other segments tomorrow. I'm sure that we're both free tomorrow to cover them. So stay tuned tomorrow for the stream. And is there anything you want to plug before we go, Noah?
Not really. My first book by me will be out soon, though. I'm so close.
Likewise, I'm in a similar position. I have I'm sure if you're listening in and you're a usual listener, you have heard about the concept of the purity fetish. Developed it in an article first 2 years ago, and it's been a very central part of my writing since. And now I'm developing it in as comprehensive a form as I can in a book project that, again, should be out fairly soon. But if you haven't already, please make sure to check out our Journal of American Socialist Studies, which is a very special project. It's our second issue, and it contains essays from Noah, myself, Eddie, from an interview with Noam Chomsky, and it contains great essays from a whole horde of folks that are very much committed to capturing the positive history of U.S. socialism and U.S. radical struggles. So I'm going to link the where you can purchase the journal. You can get yourself a $10 ebook copy and a $30 paperback copy, and it's $30 because it's a color and it's got very much nice designs inside. But get yourself a copy. Help fund the Midwestern Marx Institute. If you want to donate, consider becoming a Patreon, and you can also check out our other books at midwesternmarx.com/books. So with that, thank you very much for sticking around.
One more thing, brother. I forgot. February 28th, I will be speaking on behalf of the Institute at the W.E.B. Du Bois Symposium in Philadelphia, put on by the Free School for, I think it's Free School for Black Liberation and, I'm such an asshole.
It's Socialism and Black Liberation.
Yeah, there you go. Okay.
I think the short is just the Saturday Free School.
Okay.
It's an excellent project developed by Dr. Montero. It just hit its 10-year anniversary last year, and it does very important work grounded in Philadelphia and in the Black community and diverse community there. And it's very much grounded in the work of W.E.B. Du Bois, who for us is perhaps the, or if not one of the most important American Marxist thinkers, and also very much embedded in the work of Henry Winston, which is a tradition that we are definitely embedded in, and we're actually going to be releasing a book of Henry Winston's selected writings later this year. So check out the Saturday Free School if you haven't already, and it's I'm sure that we'll be uploading Noah's presentations when those are to come. I wish I could be there, but I have a newborn, so I won't be able to make it. But yes, please do check out our books if you want to fund the project. Again, check out our Patreon. Thank you all for being here, and we're going to roll out with our introductory video. Thank you.
Racial injustice and economic injustice cannot be solved without a radical redistribution of political and economic power.